This is the story of David Mercer and his girlfriend Rachel Calloway. David is a man who mistakes steadiness for strength. He built his life around the idea that if he showed up consistently to work, to fatherhood, to love, then love would hold its shape. After his divorce from Logan's mother 3 years ago, he moved through grief the way he moved through most things, quietly, without complaint, and slightly ahead of the feeling itself. Rachel arrived in his life like something he hadn't known he was waiting for, warm, attentive, full of the certainty that he found both comforting and, in moments he didn't examine closely, slightly too rehearsed. The tension in this story is not dramatic. It lives in the space between what David sees and what he chooses not to look at. And the tragedy is not that he was deceived, it's that his 16-year-old son saw everything first. The dinner was Rachel's idea. She had mentioned it the week before, standing in David's kitchen in one of his old flannels, pouring coffee into the wrong mug, the one Logan had made in 7th grade ceramics, lopsided and glazed a deep, uneven blue. David had noticed, but hadn't said anything. That was a small thing. He was good at letting small things go. "I want to meet your family properly," she'd said. "Not your son, your family." He had liked that. It felt like she was already orienting herself towards something permanent. Logan, when told, had simply nodded from behind his laptop screen. "Sure," he said. That single syllable managed to convey neither enthusiasm nor resistance, which at 16, David had come to understand was actually a form of communication. It meant, "I'll be there. I'm paying attention. Don't assume you know what I think." David had learned to read that tone the hard way, in the first year after the divorce, when Logan had said fine to everything, and David had believed him each time. Rachel's apartment was in the kind of building that had been renovated recently enough to feel aspirational, but not quite long enough to feel settled. There were still bare patches on the hallway walls where art hadn't been hung yet, and the elevator made a sound on the way up that suggested it was thinking about the request rather than honoring it. She answered the door in a cream linen blouse, her dark hair down, and the apartment smelled like garlic and something herbed and slow roasted. David felt the particular relief of arriving somewhere that had been prepared for Yua, a feeling he associated with childhood, with being taken care of, and which he had been quietly chasing ever since. "You must be Logan," Rachel said, stepping aside to let them in. "Yeah," Logan said. He gave her a handshake instead of a hug, which was the right call, and Rachel seemed to appreciate it. David watched his son glance around the apartment in that unhurried way he had, not nosy, not restless, just registering. The living room was tasteful. Neutral colors, a few books arranged on a floating shelf, a gallery wall near the hallway with framed prints and 2 photographs. One was of Rachel at what appeared to be a lakeside somewhere, squinting happily into sunlight. The other was a group shot at what might have been a wedding, Rachel in the middle, arm around a woman David didn't recognize. "Smells incredible," David said. "It's been going since 2, she said, returning to the kitchen. And the domesticity of that sentence, the image of her spending her afternoon cooking for them, settled into his chest like something warm. Logan set his jacket on the arm of the couch and studied the gallery wall for a moment longer than the situation called for. David noticed but filed it away as teenage curiosity, or indifference. They looked similar from the outside. Dinner was good, not just the food, the conversation. Rachel was easy to talk to in the way that some people are, not because they're performing ease, but because they've learned to ask questions that make other people feel interesting. She asked Logan about school with the specificity that showed she'd retained what David had told her, that he was taking AP history, that he'd quit soccer to do robotics, that he had strong opinions about film scores. Logan answered in full sentences, which David privately counted as a success. "Do you like doing the robotic stuff?" Rachel asked, refilling Logan's water glass without being asked. "It's more problem-solving than building," Logan said. "Like, the robot is almost secondary. You're really just trying to find where the logic breaks down." "Huh," Rachel said. "That's a nice way to think about it." Something passed across Logan's face, brief, unreadable, gone before David could name it. He ate his roasted chicken and told himself everything was going well. And it was. almost entirely. The moment that would stay with David came near the end of the meal, when Rachel excused herself to get dessert from the kitchen and Logan leaned slightly forward, his elbows on the table, and said quietly, "That photo on the wall, the one at the lake. What about it? She said she grew up in Ohio, right? Near Columbus?" "Yeah," David said. "Why?" Logan glanced toward the kitchen, then back. "The mountains in the background of that photo, they're too high for Ohio." David looked at him. "Maybe it was a trip." Logan shrugged. "Maybe." He leaned back and picked up his fork again. Rachel came back with a plate of lemon tarts. They were beautiful. Logan ate 2 of them and complimented her genuinely, and the conversation moved on. But David noticed for the first time that his son had eaten the entire meal with the careful attention of someone who wasn't just having dinner. He was studying it. He told himself it was nothing. He was almost right. The following weeks felt like standing in a room where the temperature had dropped by 2 degrees. Not uncomfortable, just different enough to notice if you were paying attention. David was not, by habit, someone who paid close attention to his own unease. He had developed, over the course of his marriage and its ending, a reliable system for managing discomfort. He stayed busy, he stayed useful, and he gave the feeling enough time to either resolve or sharpen into something he could name. Ambiguity troubled him more than bad news. At least bad news had edges. Rachel was warm with him. Consistently, reliably warm. She texted in the mornings, made plans that required coordination, and had begun leaving a spare toothbrush at his apartment in the way that was casual but not unintentional. David appreciated all of this. He appreciated it in the way you appreciate something that is exactly what you asked for, and so you spend a small amount of time wondering why you're not more satisfied. Logan said nothing more about the photograph, but he started asking questions. They were quiet questions, slipped into ordinary conversations so naturally that David only recognized the pattern in retrospect. At dinner one Tuesday, while they were eating reheated pasta, "Does Rachel have family here, like local?" "She mentioned a sister," David said. "In Portland, I think." "Does she visit?" "I don't know. We haven't really talked about it." Logan nodded, twirling pasta onto his fork. "What did she do before the marketing consulting?" "I'm not sure I know the whole timeline." David set his fork down. "Why are you asking?" Logan looked up. "Just curious about her. She seems interesting." The word interesting in his son's vocabulary had a particular range of meanings. It could mean genuinely intriguing. It could mean anomalous. It was rarely neutral. "She is," David said, and changed the subject. He brought it up to Rachel the following weekend, not as an interrogation, but as the kind of casual conversation that couples have when they're building a shared understanding of each other. They were walking along the riverside path near her building. The air still cool for late April. The trees in that transitional state where they're green enough to look intentional, but not yet full. "Logan was asking about you," David said. Rachel smiled, looking ahead. "Good things. Just curious about your background, where you're from, your family." He paused. "I realized I don't know that much either about the years before Columbus." A half beat. Not long enough to be suspicious if you weren't watching for it. "There's not much to tell," she said. "I moved around a lot in my 20s. I had a version of my life that I don't think about much anymore." "What version?" She glanced at him then, and her expression was something he couldn't quite categorize. "Not open, something in the middle. A version where I made choices I'm not proud of," she said. "I got into some financial stuff with people who weren't honest. I came out of it, but not cleanly." "What does that mean?" "It means," she said carefully, "that I had to reinvent myself a little. Professionally, personally." She reached over and briefly touched his arm. "It's not a story I lead with, but it's not a secret." David accepted this. It was, he told himself, the kind of past that people have. Complicated, private, evolving, he had his own. What he didn't notice, because he wasn't looking for it, was that she had answered the question of what, while leaving the question of where and when and with whom entirely intact. At home, Logan was on the couch with his laptop open, some documentary playing at low volume. David sat in the armchair across from him and didn't say anything for a while. She had some financial difficulties, David finally said, in her past. She was upfront about it. Logan kept his eyes on the screen. What kind? She didn't go into detail, but you didn't ask. It wasn't a criticism exactly, it was a description. But there was something in the flatness of it that David felt in the same place you feel a low-grade toothache dull, persistent, right at the edge of tolerance. I didn't want to make her feel interrogated, David said. Logan glanced over at him for a moment. His expression was careful, neutral in the way that sometimes meant he was holding something back. You know, he said, and then he stopped and looked at the screen again. His voice shifted slightly, strange for just a second, like something had tuned in from another frequency. I don't know. Maybe like this story or subscribe or something? He blinked, shook his head. Sorry, that was weird. I don't know why I said that. David stared at him. Why? Nothing. Logan rubbed the side of his face. Forget it. I just add. Her LinkedIn only goes back 4 years. A silence. People update those things inconsistently? David said. Yeah, Logan said. They do. He closed the laptop and went to bed. David sat in the armchair for a while longer, in the dark and the quiet, listening to the building settle. Logan showed him the spreadsheet on a Thursday evening, not dramatically. He didn't sit David down or build toward it. He came into the kitchen while David was making coffee, set his open laptop on the counter beside the mug, and said, I want you to look at something. You can be mad at me after. David looked. It was a document organized with the kind of methodical precision that David associated with Logan's robotics work. Clean columns, color-coding dates. At the top was Rachel Calloway's name. Below it, a timeline. Then a list of linked articles, a court record accessed through a public database, a series of screenshots from social media accounts that no longer existed but had been archived. The name in the articles wasn't Rachel Calloway. It was different, hyphenated, the first half unfamiliar, the second half Calloway, and the woman in the older photos was recognizably the same person, just younger, with shorter hair and a different city visible behind her. The case was civil, not criminal. Financial fraud adjacent, not the orchestrating kind, but the participating kind. A real estate investment scheme in Phoenix collapsed in 2019 that had left 14 people with significant losses. Rachel's former name appeared in the plaintiff filings not as a perpetrator, but as someone who had referred clients and received fees. It wasn't clean. It wasn't criminal. It was the gray area where people learn to live with themselves by rearranging the story until they're the cautionary tale rather than the cause. David read it twice. Then he looked at his son. Logan was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, watching him with the kind of steady attention that David had always thought of as Rachel's quality, and now recognized as entirely his own child's. How long? David asked. I've been looking since the dinner, Logan said. The mountains in the photo. The lake was in Colorado. She went to school in Denver, not Columbus. The LinkedIn thing was just confirmation. He paused. I wasn't trying to blow anything up. I kept thinking I was wrong. You're not wrong, David said. I know. David looked back at the screen. He thought about the lemon tarts, the flannel, the toothbrush, the way she touched his arm when she said, it's not a secret. He thought about the version of himself that had believed her, and how much he had wanted to believe her, not because he was foolish, but because wanting to believe someone is not the same thing as being deceived. Sometimes you just need the story to be simpler than it is. Did she ever ask you about money? Logan asked carefully. And there it was, the question that clarified everything. Because yes, she had. A few weeks ago, casually, over wine, she'd mentioned an investment opportunity, something a colleague had told her about, low exposure, interesting returns. She hadn't pressed. She'd backed off when he changed the subject. But she had mentioned it. He had filed it away as small talk. Dad, Logan said. I heard you. I don't think she's a monster, Logan said. I just think she might be someone who does things to survive that leave other people worse off. And I don't know if she's doing that here, but I thought you should know what I found. David closed the laptop. He didn't do it hard. He just pressed it shut, slowly, with his palm flat on the lid. "Thank you," he said. Logan nodded. He didn't say "I told you" or "I knew it." He just picked up his laptop and went back to his room, leaving David standing in the kitchen with cold coffee and the particular weight of having been protected by someone who was still, technically, a child. He called Rachel the next evening. He didn't rehearse it. He had thought about it for 36 hours, not obsessively, but with the slow, grinding thoroughness that he applied to everything important. He sat across from the window in his apartment, phone in hand, and when she picked up he said, without preamble, "I know about Phoenix." A pause. Long enough to be meaningful. "Okay," she said. "I know the name, the case, the clients." He stopped. "I'm not trying to make this into something it doesn't have to be." "What do you want it to be?" she asked. Her voice was even. Not cold, just careful in the way that people who have been through difficult conversations before are careful. "I want to understand what you wanted from me," he said. Genuinely. Another pause. He heard her exhale. "I wanted what I told you I wanted," she said. "David, I like you. I like what we have. And the investment thing you mentioned. I shouldn't have brought it up." It was a reflex. I backed off. "You did," he said. "That has to mean something?" It did. He knew it did. And that was almost the hardest part, that her half-truth contained within it a real truth, that her restraint had been real restraint, that people who have done wrong things are still not entirely wrong, and that none of that changed what it felt like to be standing in his kitchen, knowing his 16-year-old had seen clearly what he'd chosen not to. "I need some time," he said. "I know," she said. There was nothing more after that. Not silence as punishment, or anger contained behind politeness. Just two people at the edge or something, looking at the distance they'd have to cross, and neither of them pretending it wasn't there. By July, David had arrived at a version of the story he could live with. Not a comfortable version. Not a self-serving one. Exactly, he had too much self-awareness for that, and Logan was still in the house, and Logan had his way of going quiet that functioned like a mirror. But a version, nonetheless. The kind that doesn't resolve so much as settle, like sediment after the water goes still. He had not gone back to Rachel. He had also not said anything final. They had exchanged a few texts in May brief, thoughtful, with the grammar of people who are being measured with each other, and then the texting had stopped. Not in a moment, but in a gradual slowdown that was somehow more final than a conclusion would have been. He thought about her sometimes while doing ordinary things. Making coffee. Driving to the hardware store. He didn't think about her with anger, which surprised him. He thought about her more the way you think about a road you didn't take, not with longing, exactly, but with the specific curiosity of wondering where it would have gone. Logan didn't ask about her. That too was a kind of grace. What David did do was start asking different questions. Not about Rachel, about himself. About the way he had stood in her apartment and looked at the gallery wall and felt warmth while his son, standing 6 feet away, had looked at a mountain range in the background of a photograph and felt doubt. He thought about the ways he had been trained by his own life to want comfort more than accuracy. His marriage had done some of that. The divorce had done more. Somewhere along the way, he had developed a preference for the story that let him sleep. He brought this up to Logan once, on a Sunday afternoon, while they were eating sandwiches in a dull and unremarkable way. "I think I was tired," David said. Logan looked up. "That's not an excuse," David said. "It's just, I think I was tired of being cautious, and I let that make me careless." Logan chewed his sandwich. Considered. "You weren't careless," he said. "You were hopeful. That's different. Is it? Careless means you don't care about the outcome. You cared. You just wanted the outcome to be a specific thing." David looked at his son. There was, in that moment, something quietly astonishing about him, not his intelligence, which David had long recognized, but his gentleness with it, the way he could hold a hard truth without sharpening it into a weapon. "When did you get like this?" David asked. Logan shrugged. I grew up watching you and Mom, he said. You both tried really hard. I just learned to watch what people did when they thought no one was looking. Rachel, he would learn from a mutual acquaintance months later, had moved to a different city, not fled moved. The distinction felt important, though he wasn't sure why. She had a new role somewhere, something legitimate and client-facing. The acquaintance said she seemed to be doing well. David believed it. He found he genuinely hoped it was true. What she had been running from in Phoenix, what she had been building toward in the city where he'd met her, he could only partially see. She was not a person who had wanted to harm him. He was fairly confident of that. She was a person who had learned to move through the world with a certain lightness, leaving behind the heavier parts of herself, carrying forward only what was useful. That was its own kind of tragedy, and it belonged to her. He didn't romanticize it. But he didn't condemn it either. He just let it be what it was, a chapter that had ended before it became a mistake. October arrived the way it does in the Northeast, quietly at first, just a suggestion of amber and brown in the tallest trees, and then all at once with cold mornings and the smell of something ending. Logan turned 17 in the second week of the month. David took him to dinner at a place he'd been wanting to try, not fancy, just good, with low lighting and a menu that had 4 things on it, which Logan said was a sign of confidence. They ate slowly and talked the way they had begun to talk more regularly that year, not around things but through them. Are you seeing anyone? Logan asked near the end of the meal. Not currently, David said. Are you okay with that? David thought about it. Genuinely thought about it in the way the question deserved. I think so. I'm not in a hurry. Good, Logan said. Then, you know I wasn't trying to ruin it. In the spring. I know. I kept seeing things that didn't line up, and I didn't know what to do with it. I thought if I kept it to myself, I was doing you wrong, and if I told you I was doing something else wrong. What made you decide to tell me? Logan was quiet for a moment. He turned his water glass in a slow circle on the table. She mentioned the investment thing to you, he said, and you didn't bring it up with me, which meant either you didn't think it was important or you did think it was important and you were hoping it would go away. He looked up. Either way, I figured you needed someone on your side who wasn't hoping. David held that for a moment. Outside the restaurant window, a couple walked past, their breath visible in the cold air, hands in pockets, shoulders almost touching. You were better at this than me, David said. At seeing her. I wasn't personally invested, Logan said. That's all. You cared about her. I was just watching. Still, it's not a competition, Dad. No, David thought, it wasn't. And that was the point. His son had not done something David couldn't do. He'd done something David hadn't wanted to do. The difference was not ability, it was willingness. And beneath willingness, fear. The fear of finding something that would cost him the warmth of it. He'd wanted the warmth more than the truth. He understood that now, not with bitterness, but with the particular clarity that comes when you finally stop moving fast enough to outpace your own self-knowledge. They drove home with the radio on low, something instrumental, something that didn't require attention. The trees along the road had gone dark with the season, their shapes just visible against the sky. Logan had his window cracked despite the cold, his elbow on the door, watching the world scroll past. David thought about what it meant to love someone, a child, a partner, yourself in a way that was genuinely honest, not performatively honest. Not honest in the loud, self-congratulatory way, but honest in the way that costs something, that risks the comfort, that looks at the mountain in the background of a photograph and says, that's too high for Ohio, and doesn't look away. He hadn't learned that yet, not fully, but he had a son who had, and who had been patient enough to teach him without once making him feel stupid for needing the lesson. Thanks, David said when they pulled into the driveway. Logan looked over. For what? For what? For what was quiet for a moment. Then he opened the car door and the cold came in and he said simply, that's what I'm here for. He went inside. David sat in the car for another minute, the engine off, the night quiet around him. Above the roofline, the sky was clear and very dark, and the first stars were just beginning to be visible, not arriving, but revealing themselves as they always had been, waiting for the light to fade enough to be seen. He got out of the car, he went inside. He did not look back. Some people leave your life quietly, and the silence they leave behind is the sound of everything you didn't ask.